Good to see you again, Year 10. Today's lesson will start off with a quick recapping activity. I want you to, from memory, try to write down the 10 steps to war that we did as a lesson last month. And if you can, rank the steps from most to least significant. Okay, as I said, from memory. If you're stuck, go back through your notes and look at this lesson, how did Hitler's foreign policy help lead to war? The video can also be found on my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And that then ties us nicely into this lesson, which is titled, How Far Was Appeasement Responsible for the Outbreak of the Second World War? Now, we might have to spend a bit of time on this because there are a lot of events connected to this, but we want to first and foremost today know what the policy of appeasement was and to understand why appeasement was unsuccessful at stopping Hitler overturning the Treaty of Versailles, considering in particular the actions he took in the Rhineland. There were other actions that he took that we will look at in subsequent lessons, but today we are just focusing on appeasement and what Hitler did in the Rhineland. So the first thing you need to write down or figure out is what the policy of appeasement was. Well, appeasement is a political policy of conceding to aggression by a warlike nation. Okay, you're going to want to write that out. It's worth noting, don't have to copy this bit out, but it is worth noting that a classic example of appeasement is that of Britain and France under Neville Chamberlain and Edouard Daladier, in allowing Adolf Hitler to reoccupy the Rhineland, annex Austria, and claim the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. Okay, this is often, when you hear people talk about appeasement, this is normally what they refer to. Now, in this country, as I'm sure you remember, last month we took great efforts to celebrate VE Day. You guys, in fact, had the whole day off timetable just so we could focus on VE Day. And Britain's participation in World War II and the stories surrounding that are a huge part of our history and something that a lot of people are extremely proud of to this day. So when you think about that, and then you think about images like this, for example, the British Prime Minister shaking hands with Adolf Hitler, or this, the England football team performing the Nazi salute before playing Germany in an international friendly as a gesture of goodwill. Or this, a derisory cartoon, making it look like Hitler was walking all over the spineless leaders of democracy as labelled by the cartoonist. It might make you wonder, how on earth could any kind of government of Britain ever even consider appeasement? Now, there are 5 reasons most commonly cited for why the British government, along with the French, decided to follow the policy of appeasement. And they were as follows. Firstly, believe it or not, some British people actually approved of Hitler's policies. Okay, this might sound quite surprising, but if you look at the evidence at the time, you take this man here, for example, Sir Oswald Mosley, who is a high-profile political figure, had been a member of Parliament and a member of both Labour and the Conservatives. He led a group known as the Black Shirts and led the British Fascist Organisation and had a lot of support, at least at first, particularly from newspapers such as the Daily Mail, which you can see here with its now infamous headline, Hurrah for the Black Shirts, supporting their activities. There were these people, a lot of people back then, albeit a large minority, considered what the Nazis were doing was putting some order back into Germany, and this only really dissipated when some of the crimes of the Nazi regime came to light. But certainly for a few years at least, the Nazi ideology was quite popular in Britain and indeed in France, as well as places like the United States of America. Quite famously, Madison Square Garden had a huge rally in favour of the American fascist organisation in solidarity with the Nazi Party. And then another reason is that the British people hoped that a strong Germany would stop the growth of communist Russia. We've discussed previously in this unit, as well as our German unit, that there are a lot of people who are terrified of the thought of a communist expansion. And certainly Karl Marx and other key figures within the communist movement had called for a worldwide expansion of communism to overrule the so-called global elites, and this particularly terrified wealthier people, as well as people who own land and things like that, and private businesses, that the same might happen to Britain, and they viewed Germany as a possible counterweight to something like this happening in Britain and a possible expansion of the Soviet Union. Thirdly, you got the feeling amongst many that many people felt that events in Europe were not Britain's business. Similar to the US's policy of isolationism, people in Britain back then felt that we should just kind of keep out of things, and it was happening in a different country, and we should just let them get on with it and not interfere. Fourthly, many people, and this is perhaps one of the more understandable viewpoints, many British people who had lived through World War II, which only happened in these days only 15 or 20 years previously, did not want to, under any circumstances, repeat that horrific experience. The large-scale deaths caused by World War I were, of course, fresh in the memory of so many, and people wanted to avoid repeating that at all costs. And if that meant appeasing a controversial regime in Germany, then so be it, at least in the minds of some back then. Finally, many people in Britain agreed with Hitler that the Treaty of Versailles was unfair. And this is an intriguing one because, a lot of these people who took this viewpoint were critical of Hitler and felt that what he was doing in Germany was dangerous, and felt that he was a despotic dictator, and were concerned about what was happening to Jews and minorities and political opponents in Germany, but nevertheless felt that they couldn't come up with a counter-argument to when Hitler would go out and openly say that the Treaty of Versailles was unfair. So, perhaps understandably, many British people felt that he may have had a little bit of a point, and therefore going to war to defend what they viewed as a flawed treaty would be a pointless exercise. Nevertheless, you've got those 5 reasons there, and I want you to copy those down and rank them in order of importance for why the British government chose to follow the policy of appeasement. Then, I want you to copy this table into your books using half a page or so, and bullet point down at least 3 positives and 3 negatives of the policy of appeasement. Refer back to that list and just do your own research and just think through from your own head why this might be seen as a positive and why there might be negatives. As a challenge, you could rank the positives from most to least. Then, what I want you to do is draw out this table. Now, this needs to be big. It needs to cover 2 pages, okay? If you have got a printer that can print on A3, that is ideal. If not, you'll just have to copy it out over a 2-page spread or on an A3 sheet of paper if you can get one. And I want you to use the attached information to fill out just the section on the reoccupation of the Rhineland, okay? Just the Rhineland section. Leave Anschluss and Sudetenland for the next lesson, okay? So you're only filling out 1/3 of this table. But as I said, this table needs to take over a double-page spread in your books so that you can allow yourselves to be as comprehensive as possible. And you need to look at the causes, events, consequences, and try and figure out how successful the policy of appeasement was here. Perhaps give it a rating out of 10 and then explain why you've given it that rating, or just generally explain how successful you think that was. That I leave up to you, okay? But remember, only the Rhineland, leave Anschluss and Sudetenland for the next lesson. Then we get on to the plenary. and we're going to imagine that it is time for a great showdown in the House of Commons, the British Parliament. And there are two key figures that you can pick from to decide who you want to imagine to be. You can either be the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Neville Chamberlain, who is in favour of the policy of appeasement, who wants to give concessions to Germany, who wants to ensure that they can keep the peace at all costs. Or you can imagine that you are Winston Churchill. Now, back then, Winston Churchill was not did not have the kind of profile or coverage or historical understanding that we have today. Back then, Winston Churchill was slightly discredited. He hadn't been seen to have done a very good job in World War I, particularly in Gallipoli, and he was what we call a backbencher. In other words, he was a member of the Conservative Party, he was a member of Parliament, but he was not considered important enough or credible enough to be a minister in Neville Chamberlain's government. And his opposition to appeasement is in fact one of the main reasons for why he was so vilified and so discredited at that time, believe it or not. And I want you to write a short speech, doesn't have to be very long, just a paragraph or so, addressing a debate on appeasement in the House of Commons. As I said, you can either be in favour of appeasement, like Neville Chamberlain, or you can be against appeasement, like Churchill. You need to persuade your fellow MPs to support you. The success criteria for this task is that it must address the key question about appeasement and what your character's view on that is. Okay, doesn't have to be your view, by the way. You could, for example, be anti-appeasement but choose to play devil's advocate and imagine that you are in favour of it and look into and try to produce a persuasive piece of writing that states that. But yes, you must address the key question. It must include lots of sped and refer to some of the key events that we've studied so far. It must be persuasive. Remember, you're trying to persuade your fellow parliamentarians to support you. And it must use, of course, correct spelling, punctuation and grammar. Okay, as I said, it doesn't have to be the longest piece of work. I'm not looking for a 30-minute for a 30-minute speech or 10-page speech or anything like that. Just keep it relatively simple, but address that success criteria. And maybe at the end, you could treat your family or whoever you're staying with under lockdown to a performance of your fantastic and spellbinding speech. Wouldn't that be a treat? As such, I'll leave that to you. Contact me if you are stuck, and otherwise just submit the work on Frog, or if you are struggling with that, email it to me. Okay? Remember, also, you got those exam questions due in by Thursday, no later. So if you can make sure you get those done, and I will give you feedback on those next Monday. Best of luck, here if you need.